Welcome everybody. In this lab video, we're going to cover the NETLAB Security Plus series, Lab 11, configuring a Radius server. So essentially a Radius server is a kind of centralized server that provides both authentication and authorization services for remote users. So this is obviously tied to identity and access management, which is the module that we are covering this week. So I thought I would kind of split screen this, which is kind of how I recommend that you approach these labs as well. So I have my lab walkthrough on the left side and the NetLab environment here. So as you can see, this directly relates to the Security Plus exam objectives. So given a scenario, implement authentication and authorization solutions. And essentially what we'll be doing in this lab is configuring Radius both on a Windows server and on an Ubuntu Linux distribution. So coming down to the start of the lab, we're going to be working on the WinOS server. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that. We'll have to go and get logged in. So I'm going to send a Control-Alt-Delete here and log in with the password from the lab documentation. So with Windows servers, it has what's called the server manager. So the very first thing we're going to do here is actually add a specific feature that we'll have to install in order to set up this Radius server. So we'll launch Server Manager from the taskbar down here. And we'll come up to Manage here, and we're going to add roles and features. Oh, wasn't quite ready yet. There we go. Cool. So we're going to hit Next here. The WinOS machine is the server that we're going to be installing on, and I believe on this first one, okay, yeah, so we are enabling the network policy and access services. So we're going to go ahead and add those features. We'll choose Next. And here we're not going to add any additional specific features, but you can see here there's a lot of things that you could potentially add on your Windows server. It all depends on what you need. So, you know, we're going to talk a lot about things like principle of least privilege, disabling unnecessary services. So this is a case where if we, don't need an SMTP server, or especially like IIS, which is a web server, if we're not running those things, we don't want to have these enabled. So Windows Server does a pretty good job of out of the box. It's, most of these services are disabled. So this is where we're saying, okay, we want to set up a Radius server. So now we need to install these specific services. So nothing here. We're just going to leave that all default. Click Next. And this is just kind of a review. And we're going to choose Install here. It goes by pretty quickly. All right, so let's go ahead and close out of that. And now that that's been installed, we'll come up to Tools, and we could actually go down to Network Policy Server. And first things first, we'll need to register our server in Active Directory. So I'm just going to right-click on NPS here, go ahead and register, and we'll say OK. All right, we are now authorized to read users' dial-in properties from the domain netlab.local. Very good. And now under Radius clients, so we'll want to drop down this menu here, and we're going to add a client. So we'll right-click again. We'll go to New. And so you can see here in the lab, we're going to add the Security Onion server. And if we come up here to the topology, just so you kind of understand what we're doing here, we are currently configuring on the WinOS machine, and we want to add SecOnion here as a Radius client. So we're adding the IP address of 192.168.0.6, which you could see this internal segmented network here. It is 192.168.0.0/24. So that's the CIDR block. And you could see here that seconion, it resides at the .6. And you could say WinOS is at the .50 IP address, so .0.50. So just wanted to add some context so you can start to understand what this topology means and how to identify, where these servers reside and, why they have that specific IP address. So let me come back to the WinOS, and we'll go ahead and add in the name, the IP address, and the password. Obviously, all of these passwords in these labs are very simple, mainly just for, testing purposes. So I don't recommend a password of password 123, for example. So, all right, that's good there. We see it enabled. And now we can create a specific network policy because we actually need to allow that server to connect to this device. So we're going to come to network policies, right click to create a new one. And we'll call this a remote access radius policy. And we're going to go ahead and add. And we want to scroll down and specifically look for, there we go. Oops, a little finicky there. Access client IPv4 address. So we'll click add. And again, we want to specify the IP address of the security onion, which again, remember that is the .6 on this network. So we'll go ahead and enter that in again here. Press OK. And we'll choose next. And we're basically saying we want to grant access here. But as you could see, we could specifically deny access to certain systems if we wanted. EAP types, we could skip that, leave that at the default. This is kind of interesting. We're not going to do any changes here. We're going to leave this at the default, but you can start to see where you can add additional constraints. And this kind of gets into the realm of attribute-based access control, or ABAC, like day and time restrictions, for example. So if you want to only allow people to dial in or remotely connect during work hours, for example, you could add specific day and time restrictions. You could restrict them on the weekends or after hours. You could even do by port type as well. That's more of a physical port security type thing. So you know that it's coming from a legitimate endpoint. But anyways, we're just going to choose next there, not going to change anything. Here as well, we're going to leave this at default. And then finally, it kind of gives us the recap, and we'll press finish. And we see our new remote access policy right here. So that completes section 1. Essentially, we just set up a Radius server and added a new client and also created that specific network policy. So now we're going to move on to the Linux machine. So we'll move over to the Ubuntu server. And I'll go ahead and get logged in. NDG labpass 123. So here, this will be working in the terminal. So if you haven't really worked in Linux before, you'll start to learn some new commands and the way of doing things, administrating a Linux machine. But we'll go ahead and open up the terminal here. And we'll check the status of the free Radius service. And we could see that it is currently inactive. So that is definitely something we will want to turn on. So I'm going to press Q to exit out of there. But first, what we'll do is we're going to create a test account, and we have to edit a configuration file, which basically what I'll go ahead and start typing out this command, and I'll explain what it means. So sudo, the sudo command on Linux is whenever we want to do an administrative task, which is a great way to limit access to administrative, configuration files using a standard user account. So you always need to kind of elevate your privileges when you want to do these kind of administrative configuration changes. So it will ask us for the password once we enter this command. So can you continue this on? Nano is a basic text editor. So we're running the Nano text editor, and we're sending it a very specific file path. So it's in the Etsy folder. Keep going into free radius folder 3.0 mods-config files. And now finally, we are calling up a specific file named authorize. So when I press enter, see this, because of the sudo command, it's asking for the password again, which is ndg lab pass 123 exclamation. Cool. So now we are inside that file. And all we have to do here at the very top, I'm just going to press return to, whoops. There we go. Press return to move that down a bit. And we're just going to add in testing, which is basically the username. And we are setting a clear text password, which is generally bad security practice, but again, it's just for testing purposes, right? So yeah, it's just setting a password as password. We can press Control S to save that. So I just saved it, and then Control X to exit out of there. Whoops. And now it's asking us, okay, once it's a split screen here, so I'm going to create a new terminal. We could just right click on the terminal icon there to choose a new window. And I'll go ahead and split screen. We're basically going to send we're going to start the server on the left side, and then we're going to send a test, basically test login, and we'll see the results on the left side as we do that. There we go. Okay, so now remember the free radius server was inactive, so we're going to start that up on the left side. We'll say sudo free radius -X. Okay, so you can see that it's currently listening, and it's listening on this. This is an important thing to always remember. 127.0.0.1 is what's called a loopback IP address, and it's basically the local machine. So because it's running locally, and it's kind of like a local test, that's why it's using that local loopback. So that's currently running on the left side. On the right side, we could run rad test, which is probably short for radius test, and the -H here is really just that's a way to get help. So if you ever have a tool in Linux that you want to get a little bit more info about it, you could usually do -H, or sometimes also --help as well. We'll give you what you're seeing here is all the various options that you have. So you can see we could set a radius directory, set a specific authentication method, enable debug outputs, all sorts of things here. So let's go ahead and do the test. Rad test. We're going to use the username of testing that we created. And remember, we set that password as just simply password. And we'll use the local loopback IP address. And also we need to specify the port number. So this service is running on port 18120. And then finally, we're just going to send a message of testing 1, 2, 3. And there we go. We see user authenticated. Whoops, where did it go? User authenticated successfully. So really what we just did there was, I mean, I want to say the word simulate, but we actually did, we authenticated with that Radius server. And then that next step would be, remember, the concept of identity and access management, the AAA framework. We authenticate, and then it would move on to the next step of like, well, what is this user authorized to do? What permissions do they have? And then remember, the other part of the AAA framework is accounting, which would be logging. How do we log these authentication and authorization attempts? And can we go back and see what our users have been actually accessing? So that completes the lab. Pretty straightforward this week. But now you know how to set up a Radius server on both Windows and Linux servers. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.